This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. Before this video starts, I want to make sure I give a shout out to the YouTube members. If you want to join a membership, please check it out below. You get exclusive badges, exclusive emojis, and you also get access to exclusive live streams and early access content specifically on this channel. So if those sound like good things or good reasons, you could do that. You can also join the Patreon if you want to do that. But let's get into today's video. And what I want to talk about today is the AFC North, because we focus so much on how difficult the AFC North is going to be. And we focus so much on everything going right for every AFC North team, including the Cleveland Browns that we cover here on this channel, that we often don't think of the very realistic amount of things that can also go wrong. And the AFC North is no different than that. Now, I'm going to run through this thought exercise and I'm going to give myself a couple of rules because, yes, obviously injuries are something that can go wrong, but injuries aren't something you can also predict or not predict. So I'm not going to use injuries to explain why a team's season can go wrong. I'm not going to use a fluke explanation like Joe Burrow suddenly plays worse to explain why a team goes bad. I'm just going to evaluate each team's roster, the flaws in that roster, and the serious problems that each team's flaws in that roster can create. So that's how I'm going to do it. I want to do this from a fair perspective because even if you don't like the Steelers, Ravens, or Bengals, I assume if you're here, you probably like the Browns. But even if you don't like those other three teams, it can be easy to be uncharitable and just say things, but it's more entertaining if you do give them some measure of charity and look at this realistically through their lens. So let's start with the team that I think this is probably the easiest exercise to do with. And surprisingly, brand wise, it's the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, why do I think, or what do I think can go wrong with the Pittsburgh Steelers? This is interesting because it's not necessarily what I think could go wrong. It's just what is the case with the Pittsburgh Steelers right now. Because if the offense is bad this year, nothing went wrong. That's just what they've been for a while there in Pittsburgh. They have not been a very good offense. Even that last year of Ben, they were struggling mightily. The Matt Canada experiment, which is in his third year there in Pittsburgh, just hasn't bared fruit, right? I remember when Matt Canada first took over the job at offensive coordinator, all these changes people said were going to be made. Oh, they're going to be play action. They're going to do all that zone read stuff, and they're going to do all that wide zone running and this and that. And then Matt Canada took over. It was still Big Ben's offense. Okay, cool. The next year when you have Mitchell Trubisky, which he wanted, and Kenny Pickett, which he also wanted, you get like 12 touchdowns in your passing offense. That's not good. That's not good. A team that cycled through 6 weeks of Deshaun Watson and Jacoby Brissett should not be out throwing you on the passing game, especially when you feel like your first round pick is somebody who has a chance to become a franchise quarterback. Now, I'm not of that belief, but people of Pittsburgh are of that belief, and that's horribly concerning with them. My biggest concern with Pittsburgh is obviously their offense. If I look within that offense, I see two problems. One, they're just a very young offense, which isn't inherently a bad thing. If they're young and talented, that's good. But we know the mistakes that young offenses made, especially in Cleveland. And then Kenny Pickett is also another reason why I'm not too confident in this offense. I'm not going to discredit anything that Kenny Pickett did to make you at home, if you feel this way, feel like he is going to be good the next year, right? Yes, he had those game-winning drives, a couple of game-winning drives, a couple of really nice throws on those drives. But I think in the whole body of work, I've seen more reason for pessimism than I've seen for promise. And at the very least, if I'm being the most charitable, it's equal. Yes, he had those game-winning drives, but you cannot just throw away everything else that he did. You're going to be ignoring some very obvious signs that should concern you. I remember doing this with Baker Mayfield and countless other young quarterbacks in Cleveland Browns history. The second they give you something good, boy, do we hang on to that and never let go. But that bad's still there. Case in point, I said it reminds me of Baker Mayfield. Not even talking about 2019 Baker Mayfield, which was obviously bad. Let's talk about 2018 Baker Mayfield, because still to this day, we only remember the good part of that season, right? With Baker Mayfield, he had that first game where he came in with the Jets and he won the Browns the first game in however long. And then they went on that run at the end of the season. But there was a whole middle part of that season where it looked kind of with Baker Mayfield. A lot of people choose to forget this. But there was that middle part between that Carolina or Atlanta game, whichever one was first, and the end of that Jets game. There was a lot of including a very concerning performance against Pittsburgh. There were some very concerning performances just in 2018, period, for Baker Mayfield. The team wasn't necessarily that great, but boy, did we hang on to that good. We ignored the bad and assumed the bad would just go away because that was his rookie year. But then his second year came up and it was a lot more of that bad. Third year, we got the good. Okay, maybe things have changed. We overlooked some of the bad in 2020. We overlooked a lot of the fortune that had to make that 2020 season happen. So we went blind into 2021 and the bad came back. My point is that this stuff is there. You have to evaluate it. You cannot ignore it. And there's too much of it that was there for Kenny Pickett in year one to ignore. Another person who there was too much bad for me to ignore anymore is Deontay Johnson. I mean, how long am I supposed to think that he's going to be the next AB, right? He's a fine receiver. He's not a number one receiver. And honestly, since Antonio Brown has left the Pittsburgh Steelers, they have struggled to fill his hole, right? They tried to do it with Juju Smith-Schuster. They tried to do it with Deontay Johnson. They're going to probably try George Pickens next. They just haven't been able to fill that hole. And also they have a very inexperienced offensive line. They're going to be starting a rookie at left tackle. More than likely, best case scenario, I think worst case scenario, you don't start your rookie left tackle. They're also going to be starting a lot of rookies on the defensive side of the ball as well, right? Joey Porter Jr., somebody who a lot of people are pegging to start. They have other rookies that they drafted this year that people are pegging for a starting position. And that's where it transitions into the second thing. The strength of this Pittsburgh Steelers is TJ Watt and what I would call a slowly deteriorating defense. Pat Peterson is 33 years old. That's supposed to be the team's best corner this year. Cam Hayward is 34 years old. That's supposed to be one of the team's, TJ Watt's primary counterpart, right? It's not really Alex Highsmith. It's been Cam Hayward, both in pressures, sack totals, any kind of defensive line metric. Number two, and arguably at times, number one has been Cam Hayward. He's turning 34. Those are concerning age turns, right? Especially for a DB. DBs usually they fry out by 32. Pat Peterson had a little bit of a bounce back year last year, but the bad tape is the bad tape from the years before. And then Cam Hayward, he's getting up there in age, right? The linebacking group's not that strong. I don't think their cornerback group is that strong. I think Minka's pretty good. I think TJ's good. I think Alex Highsmith is all right, but everywhere else, you're getting older where you're already good. And when you aren't good, you aren't that deep. So even then, if I just look at the strength of this team, I don't think this defense is strong enough to carry a bad offense. And my biggest concern with the offense of the Pittsburgh Steelers is that what do we think Kenny Pickett is? Because I don't think very many of us, even the most optimistic for Kenny Pickett, believe that Kenny Pickett's going to be somebody who can uplift a bad offense. And if this offense is not good around him, which I don't believe that they are, they have pedestrian run help with Najee Harris. He has not been what a lot of people have wanted him to be coming out of Alabama. He has what I would call pedestrian wide receiver help. Like, yeah, you got George Pickens, but everywhere else, you're kind of like good to okay in those areas. So even if Kenny Pickett is what people think he is, which is somebody who can be a decent quarterback, a la like a Kirk Cousins, okay, what do you get with Kirk Cousins in a very average roster on offense? You don't get anything with that. So that's my concern with Pittsburgh. Now, look, they have Mike Tomlin, who I believe is probably the strongest coach outside of Bill Belichick, but I don't know how much that means for this team. I think they are Pittsburgh is a 9-win team, but I really wouldn't be surprised if things swung the wrong way for them. And this is the first year that they went under 8 wins as a team, because I just don't see where they're going to make up for some of the issues that they have that are obvious on offense, and I think starting to become obvious on defense. The next team is the Baltimore Ravens, and I think this is the most interesting, most explosive, most volatile team in the AFC North, even more so than the Cleveland Browns. The reason I think this is because of this new offense. Now, we have universally, almost, it seems like anybody who's talked about the Ravens over the last 3-4 years have wanted Greg Roman gone so bad just to see if there's more you can get out of Lamar Jackson, that we're not really questioning who the Ravens are bringing in to replace him. Now, I would like to remind y'all of the Browns in 2019, where we just wanted Hugh Jackson gone. Right? We got rid of Hugh Jackson during the season, and we wanted nothing that reminded us of Hugh Jackson. So we just took whoever we could take. Browns hired Freddie Kitchens that year. Now, today, you will hear a lot of Freddie Kitchens jokes from anybody who knows about the NFL, especially that was paying attention around that time. But back then, this wasn't seen as a bad hire. This was actually assumed to be a good hire. People were actually excited about Freddie Kitchens. There wasn't really that much hesitation to get behind the train on Freddie Kitchens, both locally and nationally. Yes, there were a couple skeptics, but overwhelmingly the reception on the hire was positive. Freddie Kitchens, yes. We were uncritical of Freddie Kitchens. Why were we uncritical of Freddie Kitchens? Because the man he was essentially replacing was somebody that we just wanted to get rid of. This is a phenomenon that happens, is that when people just want to get rid of the dude that you replaced, we tend to be uncritical with the person who replaces them. Remember that when it comes to Joe Woods and Jim Schwartz, when I talk about the Cleveland Browns. We tend to also think that just because the person that got replaced was part of the problem that we were so upset about with this team, that the guy who replaces the person we wanted replaced will step in and automatically fix every problem with the offense or defense. This is kind of what I feel like is happening. Now, I also think this is happening a little bit with the Browns, but I think this is also happening with the Ravens. I think people think that Todd Monken is somebody he has not proven himself to be. And what I mean by that is Todd Monken has always been a name when it came to offensive coordinator, but like he was never a highly sought after name. This was somebody that Freddie Kitchens, with no clout, was able to bring in as an offensive coordinator in 2019. This is somebody who was kind of just hanging around in Tampa Bay. He was never that sought after of a name. He went to Georgia. They won some national championships there, and all of a sudden he is sought after, even though what we care about with Georgia is normally the defense, not necessarily what they were doing on offense. But that has rubbed off on him, and people are just uncritical about this whole Todd Monken thing, despite the fact that the last few times he was an offensive coordinator in the NFL, it didn't necessarily go well for the teams that were, for the quarterbacks, especially, that he was the offensive coordinator for. I believe Baker Mayfield led the league in interceptions, or at least was in the top 3 of interceptions when Todd Monken was in Cleveland. I also believe that Jameis Winston was high in the league in interceptions when he was in Cleveland. We don't really, not Cleveland, in Tampa Bay. We don't really talk about it that much. It wasn't a 30 for 30 season. That was also 2019, but I think in 2018 he had a lot of interceptions. Like Jameis Winston just has a lot of interceptions, right? And it's the thing that we don't talk about with Todd. I think a lot of people feel like Todd's automatically going to fix this Ravens offense. And in some ways he is. Like, I don't think you're going to have some of the same problems when it comes to wide receivers being in the same area when they run routes that Greg Roman had. But I think you're still going to have problems. One being the structure of this offense not being one that suits Lamar Jackson. And I'm not saying that because I don't think Lamar Jackson can't throw. I actually think he's a much better passer than people give him credit for. But it's about where your strengths are as a passer. I believe Lamar's strengths are in the intermediate to short game as a passer. When he has to be on time, when he's asked to be accurate in short spaces over the middle of the field, and when he's asked to hit outside throws on the numbers, he's really good. He has a strong enough arm. He's accurate there. But where he has struggled the most as a passer has been deep balls. That's where you see the most egregious misses with Lamar Jackson. That's where you see the most egregious bad reads with Lamar Jackson, is when he is trying to throw for chunk yards. That's where he's not at his best as a passer. This offense does not put him in a position to be at his best as a passer. I worry about that. A lot of people are excited about Odell Beckham in Baltimore. He is older. He is somebody who should not necessarily be here's where I am with Odell. Let me try to clarify this. I think Odell is a good signing for them. But if you're relying on Odell right now, that's a little too risky for me, right? Like, I was for the Browns throwing an offer at Odell that wasn't going to be like $15 million, but if they could give a modest offer to Odell and just see what happens with him, he could be a very good player in a specific role. I think he's a role player at this point in time in his career. I think that's what he was well for the Rams. I think that's what he is now for an NFL team, is a really good role-playing wide receiver. I think the days of him being top receiver in the league are far gone, and that's fine. But I feel like the Ravens are leaning on him to be a little bit more of a top receiver than a role player, which is a big concern. We're putting a lot on Rashad Bateman. I like Rashad Bateman, but Rashad Bateman hasn't really done much in the NFL. This wide receiving core is full of question marks. It's better than it's been in past years, but that's not much of a compliment when literally last year you were down to people you picked up off of waivers starting for you. Like, that's what the Ravens wide receiver room was. A bunch of people nobody else wanted. So yes, it's better now. It's not necessarily in a great spot. The O-line is getting older. You know, you got multiple guys getting around 30 or over 30 on that offensive line. Even Ronnie Stanley, he's 29, about to turn 30 soon, with multiple season-ending, career-threatening injuries under his belt. So his 29 is a lot closer to 30 than a lot of people are assuming. They also have I think a couple older players with 30, somebody's 32, somebody's 34 starting on that offensive line. So they're getting older. They also don't have a premier pass rusher. For as good as that defense is, no premier pass rusher. That's got to be a little bit concerning, especially if your corners are not able to play at the high level that they've been at. And when there are cracks in that foundation, it breaks a lot of the times. They really need somebody to step up and be a premier pass rusher. But when Odafe Owe is your best pass rusher, that's a big concern. It's a massive concern. This Baltimore Ravens team, to me, is either a 11-win football team or a very, very angry 8 or 9 win team. They really do remind me a lot of the 2019 Cleveland Browns. I think they have the same volatile potential where the Cleveland Browns could have been like one of the best teams in the league in 2019. Also could have been a very angry single-digit win team. I think Baltimore has that same possibility. Let's talk about the Bengals. And admittedly, the Bengals are a hard one to do because I don't see them going under 500. I don't see their season turning into disaster unless they have some kind of fluke happen to them or some kind of like disastrous injury. But what I do think is the case for the Bengals is that it might be that the last 2 years that the Bengals had might have been their shot. And they're never going to get better than they were those last 2 years. Why do I believe that? An increasingly mediocre run game, right? Joe Mixon has been mid. That run game has been mid. It's just the mid run game. It's getting more mid as the days go on. They're constantly like having to make tinker changes to the offensive line. So the guys that are there aren't really getting any continuity. And the reason they have to do that is because they just don't have a good offensive line. So they need to upgrade it. The offensive line, you can argue, is the reason they didn't win the Super Bowl and the reason they didn't go back to the Super Bowl, right? Chris Jones has an amazing game versus them in the AFC Championship last year, keeps them from going to the Super Bowl. You look at the Super Bowl year they went to 2 years ago, Aaron Donald damn near won Super Bowl MVP on them. It's not hard to find what the flaw is with the Bengals, and they've been trying to fix it, admittedly. They brought in Orlando Brown Jr. this year. Last year, they brought in Leo Collins. They're trying to figure out what the hell they're going to do with Jonah Williams. Like, they've been trying to fix it. But the fixes has also led to the offensive line just constantly being in flux. So even when you do plug in a solution, it's not going to be day one. It's going to take a little while to get there because these guys need to build some chemistry together, and they just haven't had the opportunity because of the lackluster play that they've had at offensive line. They also have a thin secondary. I don't think their secondary is as deep as it's been. And look, regular season record wise, I think they're probably going to be fine. I don't see them dipping below 10 wins. They're probably going to be a 10 to 12 win team, maybe even a 13 win team. But as far as playoff success goes, I think the lack of depth, the lack of options that they don't have on offense, they just don't have a running game that's very compelling. The offensive line issues have been there for a while. A thin secondary. These are things that add up to you and affect you in the playoffs. And I just don't think that they're going to be able to replicate the success of those first 2 full years of Joe Burrow going forward. This year might be their last year to do it. Because they're returning everybody. But after this year, some guys have to get paid. That's going to kick more guys out. They've already lost Jesse Bates. The secondary is already much thinner than it was last year. So the time has started to run out, and I think they've peaked out with this roster already. I think those last 2 years might be what they were their best shot at winning a Super Bowl. All right, let's talk about the Cleveland Browns. And look, I talk about what can go wrong with the Cleveland Browns like almost every day here. So I'll try to be brief because, again, if there's no really mystery on what I think could go wrong for this team. Outside of the obvious, right? Injuries and Deshaun Watson just like not being good. And I think that's more than like a fluke because he didn't play well in 2022. So, you can say, hey, well, what if Deshaun just doesn't end up being the guy? That's going to be a big problem for this team, right? They'll probably end up in the same place that they were last year and the year before, under 500, if Deshaun does not step up and play well. That's obvious. Some of the bad habits they built up over the last 3 years on defense aren't just going to go away. So this defense isn't going to be as good as it looks like on paper immediately, if at all, during the season, right? Jim Schwartz is a really good defensive coordinator. He's not a miracle worker. So it's not realistic to think that he's not going to inherit problems from what's been here over the last few years, especially if you think that was bad coaching. So that's just going to be a thing. It's not going to go away during camp. It's not going to go away because of a couple preseason games. It's not going to go away within the first 4 weeks of the season. It's just going to linger there for a little while there. That's just the reality of it. The defense is not in a position to just automatically jump and get better. I think the secondary, especially, that's where a lot of the bad habits are going to hurt you. Now, I think luckily they brought in some safeties, Juan Thornhill and Ronnie McLeod, to kind of make sure that they don't have as many bad habits there in the deep part of the secondary. So you're not getting beat deep all the time. But in these like 3rd and 7 situations, or just like trying to get off the field, I don't think they're going to be able to get off the field as much as we want them to, because I think coverage is where you're going to see those bad habits pop up the most. I think that's where we're going to be most frustrated with this secondary, or at least have the most potential to be frustrated with, is this secondary. I think linebacking wise, people make a big deal out of it. I don't really think that's going to be the downfall of this defense. Pass rush wise, I think they'll be fine. It's not going to take them that much to adjust. But that secondary, that's where I have some concerns about their ability to get off the field on 3rd down. They're very talented there. I believe in Greg Newsome. I believe in Martin Emerson. I believe in Denzel Ward, but I also think that they're just going to have some bad downs here, and those are probably going to pop up the most on 3rd down. Hopefully they're not as bad on 3rd down as they were last year, and I don't expect them to be as bad, but I don't expect them to be a top 3rd down team. I would be very surprised if that were the case. So that's a little bit of an issue for the Cleveland Browns. Offensively, we talked about it. Really, Deshaun Watson's the main thing you need to watch. Everything else, they're putting a little bit on Elijah Moore, who we've not seen really produce, so that could be something that could disappoint this team. David Njoku not being consistent, or not getting the consistent production that we've been expecting out of him for like 5 years now. That's definitely a thing that could go wrong. Offensive line wise, Deshaun Watson holds the ball a lot, so maybe sacks are something that blows up this season. The Browns are similar to the Ravens, where it's like, hey, they're either going to be an angry single-digit win team or a very, very, very scary 11 or 12 win team, right? That's kind of the range. It's going to be interesting to see how this season lays out for all of the AFC North teams, but I don't think it's rose petals and sunshine and easy going for any of these teams. I think they all have problems. They all have things that can catastrophically that can destroy their season. They all have problems, catastrophic problems on both sides of the ball sometimes. So I don't expect this season to just be chalk. I think that there's going to be a lot of wild cards, a lot of, hey, we feel this way in September, then we get to December and we feel much differently. It's going to be a long season. It's going to be a wild ride. Strap in. The story's not going to be clear to us in week 1 or week 2, week 3. It's going to go all the way to week 17 and 18 for this team. But that's my thoughts on the AFC North and why every team in the AFC North could fail in 2023. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have a better night.